Hello, everyone. It looks like we are going live here. Let me know in the chat if it's live for you guys. Thank you all for showing up today. I'm just going to do a quick introduction, and then we're just going to dive right into the content. I'm really excited to learn from Kindra today, and I'm sure you guys all are too. So if you guys do not know Kindra, Kindra Hall is a sought-after keynote speaker, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, and she's the Chief Storytelling Officer at Success Magazine. She's trusted by global brands to deliver messages that inspire teams and individuals to better communicate the value of their company, their products, and their individuality through the skill of strategic storytelling. Her newest book, Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, teaches readers how to take control of their self-stories and overcome limiting behaviors such as negative self-talk, which we'll be addressing today. If you do decide that you'd like to purchase the book after listening to Kindra today, you will have an opportunity to do so. Just check your email, and there's also a link in the chat. But without further ado, I'm going to pass on the stage to Kindra, who will tell you more about her self-storytelling process and how you can apply it to your own life.
Yay. All right. Hey, give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can see and hear me. My name is Kindra, and I am so happy to be here. Hey, Victory, thank you so much for the note, and thanks for being patient. We had a few technical difficulties, but now we're here, and I am so happy to be here with you. As you heard in my intro, I'm Kindra Hall, and I'm the author of the book, Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, which I know shows up in reverse on your screen, but hopefully you can put two and two together. And before we get into the content for today, a few things. Number one, feel free to post a question in the chat. If we have some time at the end, I will be able to answer them, whether they're questions from our time here together this afternoon or this morning, depending on, or tonight, depending on where you're tuning in from. I think we had some international joiners, which I was thrilled to see. So make sure to enter your questions, and we'll see if we can get to those. And then also you can follow me at Kindra Hall on Instagram for more storytelling inspiration. But before, now that the housekeeping is out of the way, I thought it would be good to kind of start with where this comes from, because I know the title Chief Storytelling Officer or Professional Storyteller is unusual at best, and in some cases it just sounds made up, which I understand, but the reality is my passion for stories started at a very young age. I told my first story as an assignment for 5th grade. I was supposed to go into a room full of 3rd graders and read a book to them, but the girl who went before me was so boring that she chose a bad book, right? If you've ever watched American Idol and they're like, you chose a bad song, she chose a bad book, and the kids were just bouncing off the walls. And so instead of reading the book I had chosen, I decided just to put the book down and tell the story. And right away I saw a change in the room. It's like they were right there in the palm of my hand. That's when my interest in storytelling started. I had this distinct sense that our stories and storytelling are extremely powerful. Like there is a magnetic force when it comes to our stories. So as my time went on in college, I was researching the power of story in organizational development as you're building the culture of an organization. My studies in graduate school covered that. I was in sales and marketing, constantly testing the efficacy of storytelling. My first book was all about storytelling in business. The book was Stories That Stick, and we conducted some research for that as well to determine what really makes a compelling story. But as I'm sure you could tell, even throughout this career trajectory, if you will, because eventually what I figured out was like more people need to understand how powerful their stories really are, that it wasn't just about the stories we tell outwardly, but that there is a lot of storytelling happening right in here. And in fact, that perhaps that's the most important use of storytelling at all. Like if an outward story can hold an audience captive, like are we essentially holding ourselves captive on a daily basis based on the stories we're telling ourselves? And what happens if those stories are no good? Like, what does that mean for our life? And in the book, I actually share one of the crossroads um, where I really put the method that I teach in this book, and that is something that we'll be talking about here today, is what is a self story and what do you need to know about it? How is it different than self-talk or limiting beliefs? But what is the method to kind of give you an overview? Of course, I go into it much more deeply in my book, Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, the method for choosing better ones so that you can change your life. And then I want to leave you with a few common mistakes that I saw happen during the research, and even as the book has been out and the questions that have come in. But I want to take you back to one of the self stories that I was really struggling with. It was as my career was really on an acceleration course. It turns out people wanted to harness the power of your stories. And so it meant I was traveling a lot. I was presenting for organizations. I was doing my research. I was writing the book. And I could feel this belief developing. And quite honestly, I felt it every day that if I was successful in my business, I was then failing as a parent. If I was successful at work, it meant I was failing as a mother. And this manifested itself in a variety of different ways. Number one, there were opportunities that I turned down for work because I was thinking to myself, I can't do that because I'm already failing as a parent. It was making me, if for nothing else, it was just making me miserable all the time. Anytime I would experience joy in my work, I would feel like I was missing something as a parent. Anytime I experienced joy as a parent, it made me think, oh, am I selling myself short in my career? Now, keep in mind, this is just one of the limiting beliefs, the barriers I had. And this is very personal for me. You all have your own, and you might have several. They show up in the various areas of our life. And in fact, in the book, the whole third part of the book is breaking down the five of the key areas of life: business and career, money and finances, a lot of stories when it comes to money, health and well-being, love and relationships, and family and parenting. So here I am. My stories have made me miserable. And I want to make something very clear here is it wasn't just, it would have been easy to say it was a limiting belief that I had, or negative self-talk. But as I really started to examine this, and in some cases, I would say this is the beginning of writing this book, it turns out that it was more than just like a vague thing I would say to myself. There were very specific moments in my life that I could draw on subconsciously as evidence that I was indeed failing as a mother. The different pickups that I missed, the field trips that I didn't go on, the time I was scrambling because it was such a busy time and I sent a regular pumpkin to school with my daughter in October instead of a sugar pumpkin, which the sugar pumpkins are really small. But by the time I got around to getting a sugar pumpkin, they were all sold out in the city. I mean, these very finite memories, stories And then, of course, there were stories of my own mother, whose entire desire and ambition was to stay at home with her children. And so she achieved her goal. She was home with us. Pinterest wasn't a thing, but all the lunches she made were Pinterest worthy. The birthday parties that she put together. And so if I wasn't, all the stories of my mother didn't equate to the mother I was being, which meant I was failing as a mother. And finally, I was miserable and at an impossible impasse. And I had to make a choice. Because while there were all these stories, and you'll notice the title of the book isn't Change Your Story, Change Your Life. This isn't about changing reality. Reality is what it is. And I think that's one of the things that we as self-aware people, the fact that you're here is an indication that you are a self-aware person, aware enough to be growing and developing. Like to say to someone, oh, you can change your story. No, those were all true. Those things all happen. And if you have an active inner critic, it's not going to buy it. If you're like, no, you are right. However, while all of those negative stories were there, okay, I asked myself, well, are there good ones too? And you know what? There are plenty of stories of the times that I was both being excellent at my work and excelling as a mother. And in fact, I was the exact mother as a result of my career that my children needed. And there was one story in particular that I found, which is when my daughter was about 3 years old. She has this wild blonde hair. And I love telling this story. I just told it the other day, as a matter of fact. I call her a force of nature. My mother calls her karma. So there you go. And we were at home one afternoon and building something on her bedroom floor with blocks. It was very pink. The room was very pink, I remember. And she looked at me and she said, Mama, we are building a castle, which was helpful because it wasn't really clear what we were building, but now we could join together. And she looked at me again and said, and this is our castle, Mama. We live in this castle because we are two princesses, which to be seen as a princess by your daughter is a beautiful thing, even if she always gets to be Ariel. And Ariel, this was pre-Moana. I'll say I'm a huge Moana fan, but Ariel was really the girl and she always got to be Ariel. Fine. But then she looked at me one more time and said, and it is a big castle, Mama, because we are two princesses who go to work. Oh, and the pride and the enthusiasm with which she said those words. That was a story. That maybe I'm not failing my children, but maybe by pursuing my passions, I am teaching my own children to dream whatever their dreams may be. And that is a story I am very okay with. And so that was really the beginning of seeing the power of our inner stories and served as an inspiration, because one day I was so fed up, I shared this story kind of on a whim on a stage. And while people enjoyed the content that I'd shared for the majority of my message, which was about, the stories we tell outwardly, the story and the reason people stopped me after the presentation was done, as I was on my way out to the car to go to the airport and catch a flight, was people telling me about the stories that they've been telling themselves that keep them from showing up as who they're really meant to be, that steal away or siphon off their joy, that keep them stuck and unhappy and afraid and pessimistic. And so what would happen if we systematically recognized the power of these inner stories and decided to choose better ones? So that's really what this book is all about. First, to kind of bring awareness to the inner stories, and then B, to give you a method for choosing better ones so that you can change your life. Now, there are a few things that you need to know about a self story. And the first thing is this, so let's talk first about a self story. Then I'm going to share with you kind of an overview of the method, because you're going to get all the information you need out of the book right there. And then, as a reminder, I'll share some common mistakes. And if we have time, I'll take some questions. So feel free to put those in the chat. But let's start with a self story. And I think it's helpful to start with a definition of what a self story is, and perhaps most importantly, what a self story is not. Okay, we hear a lot about negative self talk, and maybe even you have a negative narrative, or you hear limiting beliefs, right? And the way I want you to see this is, while all of that is real, that is the macro perspective on it. Okay. But the problem is, if you just look at something like, how many of you have limiting beliefs about any area of your life? Maybe it's, I'm not enough. I'll always struggle with my weight. I'm terrible with money. And in fact, for my very brave souls, this is a safe space. You can go ahead and put it in the chat right here. Okay, Jennifer Smith says, me, I have some limiting beliefs. Okay, or maybe it is I'm a terrible cook, or maybe it is I'm a bad mother. And the reality is, sometimes these beliefs are true. And it doesn't really matter. Like, if you're a terrible cook and you really want to be a better cook, then you can move forward. But if you're a terrible cook and you're like, I'll just have somebody else cook, then it doesn't become a conflict. But if you have a belief that is keeping you from getting to where you want to go, from living the life you actually desire to live within your soul, that's where we've got to address it. Now, the problem is, by only looking at limiting beliefs or negative self-talk on this macro level, we're ignoring what really makes this so powerful. Because, and in the book, I talk about the analogy of an iceberg. I'm not going to talk about that here. You can check it out in the book. But underneath this big macro statement are micro stories. And it is the stories that hold the power, both the power to hold you back, and, as you might guess, those same stories, or perhaps different stories, have the power to move you forward. But if we only ever consider it on this macro level, we can never really get in there to see what is holding up these limiting beliefs, this negative self-talk. So let's say, let's do a little exercise right here. If one of your limiting beliefs is a financial limiting belief, something that has to do with money, how many of you have ever had to deal with a bank about overdraft fees? This, I struggled for a long time with money, with my money story. You'll read about some of my struggles in the book, but I remember, so yes, if you think about this, you can raise your hand, or just you don't have to put it in the chat, but can you physically see where you were one of the times that you had to make the phone call, right? Like, I remember the amount of money an overdraft fee is. And Hugh says, been there, I'm still there, right? Like, for me, this was a story that I was able to overcome and feel much better about. Sometimes it still haunts me. Old stories die hard. But I remember that an overdraft fee was $35. And I literally remember sitting on my bed in the 2-bedroom apartment that I shared with a girlfriend, hiding in my room so that she wouldn't hear me, on the phone with the bank saying, can you please cut that in half? Instead of $35, I want it to be $17.50, please. Isn't it fascinating that of all of the things in my life that happened, I can barely remember if I ate breakfast this morning, much less what I ate. And I can remember the overdraft fee amount from 15 years ago. This is how our self stories work. We can see them in their entirety. They are extremely vivid and they are there. What about for those of you where a limiting belief you have has something to do with your health? And maybe you tried exercising before. Have any of you tried to go to a group fitness class? Has anyone gone to a group fitness class and just left the class feeling like a complete failure? I remember a very specific Zumba class that I went to, and it was a long time before I went back to exercise. How about relationships? How many of you remember your first heartbreak? And you can actually remember where you were when they rejected you. Or maybe it was an adult, really. Maybe it wasn't in second grade for those of us who got started early. Maybe it was an adult relationship and you remember the moment of where you were, that you found out you were being deceived, or you discovered that the relationship was over. This is what our self stories are. They are vivid moments that contain all of the components that we discuss in my first book, which is stories that stick. Julie's like, I feel like the most uncoordinated person in a fitness class, right? Like if you have this story, anytime you consider going to a fitness class, it's replaying that story. Okay, so know that our stories, they have a character. It's often you. Or maybe it's some of the other people. How many of you remember the characters in your life, the bully that rode the bus home with you, right? You can remember their name, what they wore. It has characters. It has emotion. The emotion is a really important part of it. You can see the moment when it happened and all of the specific details. So this is what we're dealing with. This is what a story is. It's much better. It's much bigger. So it's much more powerful than I'll never be good at group fitness. It is specific and real and vivid and alive within you. So it's no wonder that we can't just say then, let's say you want to say, I am great at group fitness and I love to exercise. And this is your affirmation. And you're just going to use positive self-talk to feel better. And that will solve your negative self-talk. Well, just saying a bunch of words, this is why it doesn't. Maybe it'll help you make a little bit of progress, but it's not going to make the measurable difference that you're looking for. It's because it's more than just a statement. Our bodies are holding on to the stories. Our brains are holding on to the stories. Okay? There's a few other things you need to know, and I've seen some of it in the chat here. A few things to be aware of, that this is happening completely subconsciously. We are storytellers in our minds as it is programmed into our biology. We've been telling ourselves stories since the beginning of humankind. We use these stories to make sense of the world and our place in it. Okay. So you're not paying attention to these stories. So if you're like, why haven't I noticed these stories before? It's because you're designed not to. Our body has automated it, just like it's automated breath and blood flow. Okay. However, if you pay attention to your breath, you pay attention to your heart rate, you can optimize it. The same is true for our self stories. The other thing you need to know about your self stories is they are likely going to be inherently negative. This is what our brain pays attention to. We have a negativity bias. You all know it. How many of you have ever posted something on social media and people, they liked it, they gave you a nice comment, but there was one person who was like, meh, oh my gosh, today I just went and looked at the reviews and ratings for stories that stick. We have almost 100 for Choose Your Story, Change Your Life. If you have read it, shameless plug, will you go write a review on Amazon? It really helps get the message of the book out there. But I was just scrolling through to see how many reviews there were. And as I looked, I saw that like one person left a 1-star review. Now there was almost 100 5-stars. But what do you think my brain cares about? I can't believe I'm even sharing this with you right now. This is what vulnerability really is. All my brain cares about is that one 1-star review. And it could have been, I mean, honestly, it could have been a girl I went to high school with who hates me. Who knows who it is? Maybe it's not even someone who I have no idea, but that is the only thing that my brain focused on. And it's going to retell me that story. Now, there's a reason for this. Our brain is designed, its only goal is to keep us safe and alive, to see another day. All right. So Jen right here is like, why do we do this? And look, I'm getting so worked up that I'm messing up it's already a little. Why do we do this? And we beat ourselves up because we know we shouldn't do this, right? You're here, you know that you shouldn't let the little negative stories get you down, but your brain is actually programmed to focus on the negative because that is what is going to keep you safe. Putting yourself out there, going to a fitness class, taking a risk or trying to do something good with your money, speaking up in a meeting. Those are all seen by our ancient brains as threats, life and death threats. So it's going to bring a whole stack of your negative stories to play for you subconsciously without you even realizing it. That is what is keeping you in place. Okay. You're biologically programmed for this. And so now you can say to yourself, well, okay, you don't have to beat yourself up about it. You can be like, thank you, brain, for trying to keep me safe. I don't need quite so much help in this particular situation. I am going to choose to tell myself a different story. Okay, so that's what a self-story is and why it matters so much. And now what I'd like to do is kind of give you an overview of the methodology, just to give you a taste of, because I definitely didn't want to write a book with a promise as big as changing your life, without giving you a method for doing it. This isn't just, hey, this is great, you're going to be good. I wanted to lay it out. And this is one of those plans and I've seen it happen. I took a group of participants through this methodology during the writing and researching of this book. I've had the pleasure and honor of working with hundreds of people, or now probably thousands of people, who are applying this method after receiving and reading this book. And by choosing different stories, they're finding that their life really can change. So here's the methodology. First and foremost, the first step, it's 4 steps. The first step is you've got to catch these stories in the act. I told you that these stories are automated, that our internal storyteller is programmed since birth. You have to put 0 effort into it if you don't want to, because it's just there. However, if you're not where you want to be in a particular area of your life, there's a good chance it is the stories you're telling yourself that are holding you back. And so catching some of those limiting beliefs in the act is extremely important, because it then becomes a red flag. Wait, maybe there is a story there. Probably some negative stories. And if negative stories are there, the positive ones are too. So find a time throughout your day, whenever you feel yourself coming up against one of those barriers, those blocks, that thing that's keeping you from taking a step forward, to stop and say, wait, I bet there's a story there. That is the first step. The second step is to analyze your stories, or your self stories. And in the book, I give 6 key questions to ask yourself. And the purpose here for analyzing these stories is, this is the step where, we hear a lot about owning your story. Of course, self-awareness is really important, but this is the step where you really get to take a look inside and see where these stories have come from. It's an opportunity for curiosity, which I think is so important. And an underutilized opportunity, just curiosity in general. We often try to move right through it and think we know, but curiosity about yourself, there's an opportunity for forgiveness and compassion and like fascination in a way to say, wow, I can't believe. So, for example, I was talking with a gentleman who caught one of his negative stories, and that was perfectionism. Let me know in the chat, give me a smile or a thumbs up or an exclamation point if perfection is one of your limiting beliefs, that there are projects you don't complete or endeavors you don't pursue because you're not entirely sure you can do it perfectly, and so you don't do it at all. Okay, so this gentleman was like, this is a limiting belief, because there were endeavors that he was an entrepreneur, there were things that he wanted to do, and exactly, analysis paralysis, and he just wouldn't do them because he knew he needed them to be perfect. So as he went back in step 2 to analyze the stories, that he's like, I bet there are stories there. Sure enough, he found one. One was when he was really young, a child of the 80s, and he had a really hard time going to bed. And so his parents, to motivate him to be better at bedtime, created a poster. And every day of the week, or every night of the week rather, that he went to bed perfectly, he would get a gold star. And if he got 7 gold stars in a row for going to bed perfectly, he would get to go to the store and pick out a toy. And this was just one of the stories. Well, looking back, he finds the story and is like, wait a minute. My whole life, I was rewarded for being perfect. Perfection in my house was the goal. So it's no wonder that I still hold that, and that now it has become now it's a problem. Now it is a limiting belief. These are stories that no longer serve me. But who knew that was there? How many of you, if you got a B, was it no good, right? You needed to get an A. So this is what the analysis step does, is it allows you to take a look at what these stories are, where they're coming from. Now, was he mad at his parents? No, they were just doing their best. He was doing his best. But now with that knowledge of what he's dealing with, he can move forward in a productive way. Which then brings us to the third step, which I think is really the most important, and that is choosing a better story. Because as I mentioned, just as we have all these negative stories, it's not that there are more, necessarily more than positive ones. It's not that they're necessarily bigger, or it's that is what our brain chooses to focus on. And so much like I did with the story about failing as a mother, it sounds so simple, but it matters so much, is to simply say, what are the good stories? Like, where are the good stories? And what happens if I choose to tell myself one of those stories? And this is where the change can really happen. Now, I think I mentioned this, but the book isn't change your story, change your life, right? We need to just choose a better one. And that is where the change occurs. So imagine any of the negative stories that you have, or the limiting beliefs that you have. What are some of the stories that you could physically recall and retell yourself to motivate you? And this is the key. This is actually how change happens. Because, so think about this. Anytime you want to change something in your life, what do? You immediately go to the behavior. You adjust your morning routine. You set a different number of, you set a higher sales call goal. You say, well, I'm gonna work out 5 times a week instead of 2 times a week, and maybe see something else. But how many of you have ever let's go with health and fitness. Okay. Let's go with exercising. How many of you have ever set an exercise goal and you've adjusted your behavior? You're like, I'm gonna set my alarm. I'm gonna create a compelling playlist. I'm going to lay out my clothes, and yet still you don't work out. This was something actually I was struggling with in December 2020. I love group fitness. It's definitely a passion of mine. But of course, 2020, we still weren't working out group fitness here in New York City. And I had kind of let that become a story for me, a limiting belief. Well, I don't exercise unless it's group fitness. And since we can't do group fitness, I guess I can't work out. Was that belief serving me? Now, somebody asked, what are the 6 questions in the analyze chapter? We're not going to tell you all of them, but the most important one is this story serving me? Are the stories that I'm telling myself getting me closer to whatever it is that you desire? And if they are, then more power to you. Like, it could be that the stories you're telling yourself have put you right where you want to be and you are good to go. But or maybe you're good to go in some areas of your life, but not others. Okay. So it's all about, does this story serve me? And this idea that I can only exercise if I'm in group fitness was not serving me. None of my pants fit. I felt lethargic and disgusting. This is all, again, and I should say this is a deeply personal exercise. This entire book is about you. Okay. And so we're each going to have our individual struggles or stories. And that is, you get to be you when you read this book and you do this work. And so one day I decided that I was going to work out. I was really going to do it. I was trying to adjust my behavior. Created the playlist. I have a bicycle out on my deck. I could go ride the bicycle. Laid out my clothes, but then, I just wasn't really getting around to it. And then my husband had the audacity to throw on his running shoes and running gear and just walk out of the house and just go for a workout. And then I had a whole new set of stories. Well, of course, the dad can go out. He doesn't have to worry if the kids are fed or if the laundry's in the washer or dryer. I started to go on this spiral. Have any of you gone on a story spiral? All right. Now, at this time, I was deep in my research for this book, and I knew right then and there that I had a story problem. So what if I told myself, instead of just trying to force myself to do the behavior, what if I told myself a story that made me want to do the behavior that would lead to the change that I wanted to see in my life? So I told myself, I found 3 stories. One was a story of a wedding that I had gone to a couple years earlier when I felt great. I was keeping my promises to myself. I was exercising. I remember exactly what I was wearing because remember, our stories are very detailed. I remember what I was wearing. I remember the shoes. I remember a woman came up to me actually at the wedding and said, "You are just radiant." It was a woman I'd never met before. And I was like, thank you. And I was from the inside out, and just telling myself that story. I'm sure you can tell even as I share it with you here. I was like, ooh. Then I told myself a story of an event that I had gone to after getting back in shape, after having my kids, and how proud I was that I had taken time out of my day for myself. I felt really good. I told myself that story. And there was one more story actually, which maybe I should or shouldn't tell you, but you get to choose the stories you choose. Okay. And all they need to be are stories that work for you. So I found a story of when I was in graduate school and I was swimming. Now, swimming is not group fitness, right? So I had been swimming laps, and the lifeguard at the pool was so cute. And he actually asked me out on a date. He was a little bit younger than me. I was in graduate school. He was in his undergrad. And I called him Pool Boy. He had a name, but I only called him Pool Boy. And I remember the day he picked me up for our first date. And I was wearing this cute outfit. And I just felt so strong and healthy. And I opened the door and he was standing there and he just went, whoa. Oh, it was so I told myself those 3 stories. And how do you think I felt? Completely different. Suddenly, I wanted to get out on that bike for myself. Like, I wanted the behavior. So I told the kids, I said, unless you're choking or bleeding. And then I was like, you know what? Just don't even eat. Unless you're bleeding, don't bug me. I'm going to go ride the bike for a bit. And so I did. And it was the beginning of a new chapter for me. All because I chose to tell myself 3 specific stories. So in the book, again, much like the first chapter, and I can't go into all of it. I mean, it's like a 300-page book, okay? But I do outline several different ways that you can choose different stories, that you can just straight up replace it. You can reroute a story from a different area of your life. There's a lot of different strategies for choosing better stories and using them. You will always be able to find a story if you follow the guidance in there. And then, of course, the final step is I think this is true for all of them. I could say perhaps the most important one is to install these stories, because our default is always going to be, Julie, that's a great question. What if you don't have any good stories? All right, you know what? So maybe I should just address this right here, because this is a question that I hear often. What if I don't have any good stories? What if, so let's stay here, if it's okay, with the fitness, with the health and fitness stories. What if you've never been able to get in shape? What if you've never been happy with whatever, with your state of health? Okay, that is fair, that is true, that is common, so you're not alone. So then what we do, this is a different strategy, is we're going to reroute. So what does achieving this goal look like? What does achieving this goal, or getting to this place, what does it require? Well, if it's health and fitness, the same with money, right? It requires discipline. It requires delaying gratification. It requires effort. It requires, so what are the things that it requires? Now, look, it requires sacrifice in some ways. Look to other areas of your life where you have exhibited those things. Like maybe you are in a Bible study. Maybe you lead a Bible study, and every single week you are responsible for showing up and leading a group of people through a scripture. And the only way that you could do that successfully is if you were disciplined enough to sit down and review what it was, and put your thoughts together, and you do that effortlessly. Like that is something that you enjoy, so you exhibit that discipline. That you can use that story and bring it over here when it really is necessary. You can show up with discipline. Use that story. And you might say to yourself, like, I love what I do at the Bible study, and so the discipline is easy. But then you can use that story to say, and I know I will love the results that I get from applying that same kind of discipline to my health and exercise goals. You can do this again in any area of your life. If you're someone who says, I'm not valued at work, or my opinion isn't valued, or I'm not smart enough, maybe that's one of the limiting beliefs you have at work, in your work, is you're not smart enough. You don't have what it takes. Well, when is another time in your life when your smarts, where you maybe didn't have the smarts, but you still excelled? That is a story you can use in this situation. Now, the final step is install. And it's really important that you understand that just knowing this isn't going to be enough. It will be helpful. You're a step ahead of others who don't know the power of their stories, but the human default is always going to be the negative self story. And so it is going to require you to rewire the automation. So if there's a particular area of your life where you're really struggling, for example, for me, I always had a really hard time. For no particular reason, I would get really nervous before getting on stage. And for someone whose job is a keynote speaker, it was debilitating. It was miserable. There was a point at which I thought I would have to quit my job because I just couldn't handle how miserable I felt the hours before I went on stage. And there were stories from all the way back of me being nervous before I got on stage. And so right before or as an event approached, maybe it was the night before, maybe it was the morning of, I would start telling myself, I wrote them down in a notebook. I would read them. I would say them to myself, specific stories that helped build that belief, to remind me that I'm completely capable against all odds, to remind me that I was born to do this, to remind me, and I would install those stories at those critical moments so that I could move forward um, from a place of peace where I didn't have to quit my job because I didn't feel so miserable. So the last step is to install the stories. And that is, again, that requires effort because you're swimming upriver. By thinking about positive stories, our brain really does want to think about the negative ones. That's going to take some effort on your part. Okay. A few mistakes, just two of them. Number one, your inner storyteller, your inner critic, that's the subtitle, silence your inner critic and rewrite your life from the inside out, is very smart. All right. It is going to, you're going to tell yourself some stories and it's going to say, yeah, well, that worked in that situation, but over here, A, B, C, D, E. Like it is, you will, don't be surprised, okay, if your inner storyteller fights back. I think that if I've seen anything, it's people getting discouraged because they make some progress and they think it's instantaneous. And I should tell you that I've seen a variety of different results. For some people, there's one story, they figure it out and they go boom, and it's done. They've got it. It's awesome. And there are some self stories that take more time. They take more effort. They take more massaging. They take more chosen stories in order to stop the bleeding and reverse it. And in some cases, you'll think that you have a story under control and it'll rear its ugly head when you aren't paying attention and come back to bite you 6 months later. Okay. So just know that. Don't get discouraged. Now you know what to do. So if that pops up again, you can say, oh, I know exactly what to do. Now, the case may be that you need to find some new stories. And that's also something else I would encourage all of you to do, is now that you know the power of this, to always be on the lookout for new stories happening all around you that you can use and choose to tell yourself when you need it. And that actually leads me to the second and final most common mistake, is that we often think, especially if you have a big negative story, if you're coming from a background that is, there's a lot of negative stories there, an environment, situations. I know that our negative stories are very, very real, and can feel very, very big. And a common mistake is to think that you have to find a big positive story. Like that the only way you can ever overcome a lifetime of stories of poverty is if you become a millionaire. But the reality is, these small stories of little triumphs or moments of motivation or acknowledgement that you're doing the right thing and you're on the right path are as powerful as the big negative stories, as long as you're putting them on repeat. Our brain isn't differentiating on a baseline of the bigness of the stories. Now, it might come back. That's where I say, like, once the brain figures out what you're trying to do, it might come back at you with, well, that's really small compared to all of these things. You just have to stay the course and constantly be thinking about and collecting small positive stories. It's more the consistency of choosing good stories than the size of what those stories are. All right. Oh my gosh. We've been through a lot. I was like, oh, maybe we'll only be here for 30 minutes, but here we are coming up on an hour. Gabby, do we have any questions that I didn't answer? Maybe we take one or two?
Yes, we do have some questions. I will pick out a couple here. Let's see. One person asked a pretty interesting question. They said, did your research show that many people struggle with positive or meaningful storytelling because they don't feel worthy to tell them?
Yeah, that is. So that kind of goes to that common misconception. Here's the thing. especially as achievers, which I know many of you are, you wouldn't be here right now. We just don't pay any attention to our successes, right? Think about that. We focus a lot on our failures, on our setbacks, but we don't. And again, this goes to the negativity bias, but it's almost even bigger, or it's a tangential side of it. Like you have a success or an article gets published or somebody compliments a job well done and you're like, okay, good, next. Like you're looking ahead. And so since we don't ever pause to take a look at those positive moments and see them for what they are, now each one of those positive moments is a story. Like that becomes a tool. That's like a thing that you can collect and put. I got a compliment this morning at spin class, honestly. I was at spin. I felt miserable because I haven't ridden in the last week because now group fitness is back, so I can go exercise. And there was a whole storytelling situation there, but a guy, as he was walking out, said, "You are a great rider." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And he's like, "You're so inspirational." And I was like, all right. So even though I was feeling miserable, I was inspiring someone else. That is a positive story. I'm going to collect that, hold that, and retell it to myself when I need to. But yes, that's the problem, is people struggle to find stories, period, because we don't think about stories because, again, they're just automatic. But we struggle to find the positive ones because we rarely celebrate the positive ones. So even just that's where the practice of gratitude comes in. Even just the awareness of spending more time. I mean, your life will get better just spending more time on thinking about the positive things that have happened. Ooh, Gabby, I see a question here about a teen daughter. Yeah, and I it's very important that I say I am a storytelling expert. That's my research, that's my expertise. I am not a counselor or qualified to give any advice of that kind. But I would say, Yvette, that even this book will help her, or you can take forward the lessons that you've learned in this conversation and start sharing it with her. Though I will say, my favorite chapter in the entire book, aside, like the conclusion is the last chapter, but my favorite chapter is the last chapter that is about family and parenting, and really once you understand this, especially if you're a parent like Yvette, you have your teenage daughter, you now can equip your daughter with stories about herself that she's overlooking. You can tell those stories back to her and help her develop a more accurate image of the fiber of who she is. Gabby, any points?
Awesome. Do you want to tackle just one more here?
Sure, we can do one more
before we wrap up. Okay. So someone asks, what do we do when recent true stories reinforce old true stories?
That is hard. I've been recently sitting in that exact situation. And I will tell you, it was like, shoot. Okay. So the first thing I would say is, again, I mentioned this earlier, now you know what to do. And you know that it's it's all a story, right? And that you have the power to choose. You also know that this has never been a matter of reality or not. I mean, in some cases it is, because we can't, again, and this is in the book too, our brain can distort reality. It's not so much concerned about reality. Actually, it is definitely more concerned about the story. But here is one piece of advice that I would give to you. Because, right, we have these micro stories. These micro stories can add up to larger narrative arcs in our life, right? We can see how all of these little stories form together to create our lives. Then, of course, there's the macro level of limiting beliefs. But here's a strategy that I used just recently. And that is, when you have one of these stories that is confirming an old one that isn't serving you, okay, to remind yourself that you also get to decide where you are in the story. And in these situations, the more powerful perspective is to see yourself in the middle of a story. You know, if something happens that's reinforcing an old story that wasn't serving you, to pause for a moment and say, all right, we are in the middle of this story. I can't wait to see what is going to happen next. This isn't exactly how I envisioned it going. This isn't necessarily the story I would want if I had ended the story here. But you get to decide where the story ends. And so if you find yourself in a story that isn't serving you and it's reflective of old stories that you've tried to overcome, reframe it to recognize that you're in the middle. And what a beautiful place to be, because who knows what could happen next?
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I think we've almost taken up an hour here, so definitely went over even what we thought we would discuss. So thank you, Kindra, for giving us so much insight into your book. And also just want to let everyone know that if you buy the book from Leadership Essentials, we're also giving away, Kindra was kind enough to give us 36 storytelling prompts. So when you buy the book, you'll actually get those automatically sent to your email inbox. So if you get that book from Leadership Essentials, you'll get those story prompts. So thank you, Kindra, for giving those to us. And also remember, you can follow Kindra and just keep up with everything she's doing. I know she's very busy, got a lot of speaking engagements going on now too. And I'm sure there's another book in her head. So you can follow her at Kindra Hall. And yeah, thank you so much again, Kindra, for joining us today. And
yeah, people were asking, can they share the recording with family and friends? I'm not sure what the rules are on that.
Yeah, so you can actually go, after this broadcast ends, you can go back to this page and the replay will pop up. So since you already have access, you should be able to share it with anyone.
Perfect. Yay. And once you do read it, we would love a review. And I'm not going to look at the 1 stars. I'm not even going to think about them.
Thank you so much, Kindra.
Thank you.
See you, everyone.